walked forward alone while the officers standing in groups in front of the villa made way for him. He was tall and majestic, with a scarred, clean-shaven face, hard features, and a frightening glance. In his right hand he carried a soldier's rifle, and his left rested on the butt of a revolver. He turned around several times, striking the ground with the butt end of his rifle, and then halted in a theatrical pose. No one seemed to dare to approach him, and indeed he wore a terrible air. End quote. And as we said earlier, he's like the Heinz Guderian of this war. He's the hard-driving, impetus is everything, commanding 320,000 men, commander of the First Army. And he's going to have problems with German generals who are not as aggressive and hard-driving as he is. It's his army, well, about half of it, that will run into the British at Mons. And the traditional story is that they're in for a shock. Because as we said earlier, the British are good riflemen, but even this, just so you know, even this is contested. In a second, I'll read some stuff about this same battle from the military historian at Britain's Imperial War Museum, who will kind of go after every single point that's traditional in this narrative. But traditionally, Alexander von Kluck's forces, in sort of an encounter battle, stumble in to the British lines and take it on the chin, and are hit by so much rifle fire that is so precisely aimed and so quickly, fired that the Germans supposedly think they're under machine gun fire. John Lucy's very proud of this moment and describes what happens to the Germans thusly, quote, "Finally the shelling ceased, and we put up our heads to breathe more freely. Then we heard conch-like sounds, strange bugle calls. The German infantry, which had approached during the shelling, was in sight and about to attack us. Not a shot had been fired from our trenches up till now, and the only opposition to the Germans had been made by our field gun battery, which was heavily engaged behind us and making almost as much clamor as the enemy shelling. To my mind, it seemed that the whole battalion must have been wiped out by that dreadful rain of shells, but apparently not. In answer," he writes, "to the German bugles or trumpets came the cheerful sound of our officers' whistles, and the riflemen, casting aside the amazement of their strange trial, sprang to action. A great roar of musketry rent the air, varying slightly in intensity from minute to minute as whole companies ceased fire and opened again. The satisfactory sharp blasts of the directing whistles showed that our machinery of defense was working like the drill book, and that the recent shelling had caused no disorganization. The clatter of our machine guns added to the din. For us," he writes, "the battle took the form of well-ordered, rapid rifle fire at close range, as the field-gray human targets appeared or were struck down. The enemy infantry advanced, according to one of our men, in columns of masses, which withered away under the galling fire of the well-trained and coolly led Irishmen. The leading Germans fired standing, from the hip." Let me interrupt him here now. That's John Wayne style, walking toward the enemy, shooting from your hip. So they're coming toward the British trenches doing that. The leading Germans, as he said, fired standing from the hip as they came on, but their scattered fire was ineffective and ignored. They crumpled up, mown down as quickly as I tell it, their reinforcing waves and sections coming on bravely and steadily to fall over as they reached the front line of slain and wounded. Behind the death line, thicker converging columns were being blown about by our field guns. He then says, "Our rapid fire was appalling even to us, and the worst marksman could not miss, as he had only to fire into the brown of the masses of the unfortunate enemy, who on the fronts of two of our companies were continually and uselessly reinforced at the short range of 300 yards. Such tactics amazed us, and after the first shock of seeing men slowly and helplessly falling down as they were hit, gave us a great